Look, everybody, look how divided we are. Wouldn't it be better for one, as tragic as that might be, for one to die rather than we all be destroyed? That's the old logic. What does the gospel do? Is it fractures that logic. Because God is not approving of scapegoating violence. God is identifying with the victim of scapegoating violence. And thereby, this is Girard, pulls back the veil on this whole demonic process.
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the senior publishing director at Word on Fire. Why are so many of us tempted to scapegoat people, especially online? And how do we escape this trap? That's what we'll be discussing today with Bishop Robert Barron, who joins us from our new studio in Rochester, Minnesota. Bishop, good to be with you, as always.
Hey, Brandon, good to see you. And wondering, is the hurricane heading your way down there in Florida?
Oh, it's been a terrible hurricane season for us in Florida. Record-breaking number of them, but for now, we're okay.
All right, good. Good.
We've been together a lot of times over the last, 2-3 months. I was just with you a couple days ago there in Rochester, but last month, the two of us attended the annual G.K. Chesterton Conference. This is sponsored by the Society of G.K. Chesterton, and it travels around the country, but this year it was in Minneapolis, which is just over an hour away from where you are, and so they invited you to come give the keynote talk. Tell us about what you spoke on and what the conference was like.
I love the conference. It was a lot of fun. Great people there. Chestertonians have something in common. They're like their master. They're kind of ebullient and joyful, and especially Dale Alquist, who's the head of that operation. And Dale's talk was so rich and smart and funny and just delightful. I spoke on it's the 100th anniversary of the publication of GK's book on St. Francis. So that was the focus of the conference. So I read that book as a kid, many years ago. But then once I knew they invited me, I got the book again and read it. And it was like reading it for the first time. It had been so long. And I was just, massively impressed by it. So I think I called my talk Looking at St. Francis with Fresh Eyes, looking at this text again. So I loved it. It was a great fun conference.
We recorded your talk, so if it's not already on YouTube,
is that right?
know we'll be putting it up there soon.
Oh,
so
good.
I'll include a link to that.
I didn't know that. Good.
Well, today I want to talk with you about scapegoating. It's something you've studied and reflected on a lot over the years, particularly through the lens of the great philosopher René Girard. Girard was one of the most influential Catholic philosophers of the past century. In fact, when he died in 2015, he was 91 years old. You described him as a modern church father. Tell us about René Girard and the basics of his life before we get to some of his key ideas.
Yeah, an extraordinary figure, born 1923. My mother, who just passed away, was born in 1922, so he was right in her generation. He was born in that wonderful papal town of Avignon in the south of France. Educated over in France and in Paris, but his academic career really unfolded in our country. So he came as a young man to these shores, and he taught various places, University of Indiana, New York State University in Buffalo, also at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. But then he ended up his academic career at Stanford on the West Coast and spent about 40 years there. So he was an academic, a Frenchman of his generation, so Catholic, by heritage and by baptism, but had become basically an agnostic. And he was a student of French language and literature, and a literary theorist, we probably would say. In the course of his reading of many of the great novelists and playwrights, he discovered the dynamics that he spent his career really developing. And then at a key moment, he read the Bible. And, he knew it in a vague way, but as he looked into it, he found that it was as aware as all these great novelists were of the basic problem, but the difference was the Bible proposed a real solution. And that led Girard by some steady steps to become a Catholic. And so he dies a very ardent Catholic. And his work came to the attention of religious people. I would have come across it as a seminarian. One of my professors knew about him. And Father Steve, the CEO of Word on Fire, has always been a big devotee of Girard. And I think he got me into it more and more. Had a chance to meet him. He came to Mundelein Seminary when I was a professor there to give our Meyer lecture. So I spent, a few days with him. And he was a massively impressive person, not just as a thinker, but as a human being. I loved his simplicity, his modesty, his humility. Very impressive man. As you say, died in 2015. I was thinking the very year that I came out to California as a bishop was the year that Girard died. So that's a little sketch of his life.
You could maybe sum up Girard's thinking through his two master ideas of mimetic desire and scapegoating. And I want to talk about each one of those two. What's interesting is how they fit together and inform each other. Let's start off by talking about mimetic desire, sometimes described as mimesis. What does this mean?
Yeah. Well, Girard said that desire is hardly ever straightforward, where there's something good and I desire it. Rather, desire typically has a triangular and mimetic quality. Now, here's what he means. Why do I want object, X? Well, not just because of qualities inherent in object X, but because somebody else wants object X. And so I look at the desire of somebody else and I imitate that desire. So there's a triangularity about it. It's not just me to the object, it's me to the object, but through the person I'm imitating. Now, I know that can sound very abstract, but you know this, Brandon, from your extensive experience with your own kids. Two toddlers in a room, pile of toys. Toddler A is completely indifferent to a particular toy until what? Till toddler B wants it. And the minute toddler B wants that toy, toddler A is intensely interested in it. And the desire is imitative and triangular. And again, as any father would know, what's the result of that triangularity? Conflict, right? Hey, he has that toy. Yeah, but 5 minutes ago, you had zero interest in it. Yes, I know, but now I'm intensely interested in it, and I don't want him to have it. So conflict tends to come from the triangularity and mimetic quality of our desire.
We had an interview about a year ago. You did a Bishop Barron Presents interview with our friend Luke Burgess about his recent book, which was on Girard's theory of mimetic desire. It's called Wanting, the Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. Yeah. So I'll include a link both to that interview and the book if you want to learn more about this aspect of Girard's thought. But let's turn to scapegoating, and that's what I want to really spend the rest of this episode discussing. The theory of mimetic desire in some ways leads to the scapegoating mechanism. So introduce this to us. How does the scapegoating mechanism work?
Well, here's the simple dynamic. So imagine that triangular setup where now a conflict has occurred because of this imitative quality of desire. Now begin to multiply that throughout a community. So let's say now you have a bunch of toddlers in the room, but move from the toddler realm to any human community. And as person A wants the object because person B wants it, and then person C sees this conflict, and then there's a contagious quality to it. Now person C also wants that object. And before you know it now, there's a whole set of mimetically based conflicts within the community. If this thing reaches a point of intensity, it's called a mimetic frenzy. And you'll see this now in a community, both large and small. You can see it geopolitically in certain societies. You can see it in the smallest, human grouping. If it gets intense enough, Girard speculates, by a basic instinct, the group begins to look for a scapegoat whom they can blame for the problem and upon whom they can cast all of the tension and anxiety of the community. So here we are fighting like crazy. How did this happen? Well, see, the mimetic quality of it is often hidden, even to those who are involved, right? It's an often unconscious process. How did this happen? How did this happen? She's the one. It's when she came into our community, that's when we started fighting. Or those people over there who kind of look funny and talk funny and they're not like us, that when they came into our community, that's when all this trouble came about. So what do? We come together in casting our anxiety onto the scapegoat. And thereby we find a kind of ersatz peace. At least for the moment, we've all come together in casting our anxiety onto the scapegoat. And so for the moment, a kind of peace breaks out among us. But as everybody knows, that kind of scapegoating move never produces real or lasting peace. And before you know it, the mimetic dynamics come back into play. So Girard, this is now in Dostoevsky, Shakespeare, and all kinds of different people, notice this dynamic all the time. Can I share a little parable maybe? This occurred to me as a story that might illustrate some of this. I'll do it from my world of religion. Imagine there's a good, holy woman who, looking up to God, conceives the desire to work for love and for justice and for peace and to care for the poor. She's looking up at the transcendent good of God. Now, she starts doing her work. And then 4 or 5 other young women looking at her, looking at God, say, I want to do that too. That's a beautiful life. And so they join her. And now look, all of them coming together, looking together at the transcendent and inexhaustible good of God's will. You know, we're working for love and justice and peace and care for the poor. Now, know something, Brandon, about this. Very interesting to me. Girard saw this. That good I just described is transcendent and properly inexhaustible, right? There's enough to go around for the whole world. You can never exhaust the work of love and justice and care for the poor. We can all do that, right? There's no need to have a conflict. That's inexhaustible good. Okay, so here's a little community. Everyone's happy. It's all going great. One day, let's call her Sister Maria. She says, hey, Mother Superior, Mother General is getting older. She's about 70, and there'll have to be a successor to Mother General. And I'm pretty smart, and I'm pretty accomplished, and maybe that could be me. Now, watch what's happened. Originally, she looked at Mother Superior and looked where she was looking, up to the transcendent, inexhaustible good. Everything's fine. But now her gaze has lowered from that good to a very worldly, finite good, being Mother Superior of this community, right? So now what does she do? She begins to plot and plan and organize her life in such a way as to put herself in position to become Mother Superior. And not totally. I mean, she's still a good nun and still doing her work, but now mixed in with the transcendent desire is this very finite desire. Okay, there's Sister Maria. Now, Sister Brenda, who has joined the community with the best intentions and she's been giving her life to love and peace and care for the poor, begins to notice Sister Maria. She's acting funny. How come Sister Maria is ingratiating herself to the donors of this community? And how come she's kind of, in a cloying way, kind of being nicey-nicey to all of us, which she never was before? And she seems to be like, you know what? I think she wants to be Mother Superior. Now they both look down like this, and immediately what's going to kick in? Mimetic desire. I'm desiring to be Mother Superior because she wants it. I never thought about it before. It never occurred to me to be Mother Superior, but now I want it too. But look, only one of us can be Mother Superior. The mimetic desire has now produced conflict. All right, keep going. Now a third sister, Sister Jane. She starts noticing these two are bickering and they're fighting, and what in the world's going on? I think what's going on, they both want to be Mother Superior. But wait a minute, I'm pretty smart. I'm pretty accomplished. Why can't I be Mother Superior? I never thought about it ever, until I saw the two of them desiring to be Mother Superior. Now, 3 of them have looked down to the finite good, and now 3 of them are fighting. Now a 4th sister, now a 5th sister, now a 6th sister. And before you know it, what's happened? A mimetic frenzy has broken out. And this community is now at odds. Now, look, I've been in the religion business for a long time, and you see this happening. You see this happening. What happened in that community? They were so good. They were so happy. Look, and now they're like all at each other's throats. All right, let's take the last step. My goodness, what happened to us? What happened? Look at us. We're fighting all the time. It's when that sister, remember? When Sister Yvonne, when she joined the group, and Yvonne, she's a little funny. She's from a different background than we are, and she talks a little bit funny, and it's Yvonne. Yvonne is the one who caused all this trouble. And now the whole group turns on Yvonne and maybe even accuses her of something. Read Melville's Billy Budd now. You'll see all these details perfectly laid out. They accuse her of something and they cast her out. And for the moment, they find a kind of ersatz peace. To me, that little parable, that's the Girardian dynamic displayed. The key thing, Brad, I know I've been rambling too much here, but the key thing is the lowering of the gaze. When together we look up, there's a nice big light here in the studio, so I'm looking up at the inexhaustible good, love, truth, justice, God's will, whatever you want to call it. And together we're looking at it, and it's inexhaustible. We can all do it all the time without any conflict, I lower my gaze now to a finite good. And it's fill in the blank, wealth, pleasure, honor, power. I use the example of becoming mother superior of the community. But choose something else, money or it's influence or it's whatever. I've lowered my gaze to that. Now, almost inescapably, mimetic desire will kick in. And then conflict will follow and scapegoating will result. I'm not going to say this is the be-all and the end-all explanation of everything, but it's darn good. It's darn good as an explanation of what goes wrong with a lot of our communities.
As you say, it's maybe not the master explanation of all things, but once you begin to understand Girard's theories, you see it everywhere. And I would argue, and I want to discuss for the rest of this episode, it's especially prevalent on the internet. And recognizing it on the internet and understanding the dynamics of it is the first step to avoiding it and breaking this chain of bad behavior. So toward that end, let me ask you this question. Girard argues that scapegoats are not arbitrarily chosen. It's not just the community just randomly focuses their attention on one scapegoat, but that there are specific characteristics that make someone an ideal scapegoat. For Girard, what are some of these traits?
Well, in my little parable there, I was hinting at some of them. So a person who's different, looks different, has a funny accent. A really good example of that is in the Gospels, right? When there's the people in the high priest courtyard as Jesus is brought in for interrogation, and there's Peter, and the crowd becomes a mob, turning on him. And what's one of the things they say? Well, he's a Galilean. His accent gives him away. He's an outsider. He's a weirdo. He's not part of our gang. So it's the other quality, in look, skin color obviously is a massive thing in our society, accent, etc. So that can be one. But now flip it around too, and here's where Billy Budd comes into play. It can be someone's beauty that gets everyone's attention, and wow, look at that guy or look at that lady. Look at how beautiful. And that can stir up a mimetic resentment and make that person a liable candidate. Look how often, I noticed this when I was doing my 2 Samuel commentary, how in the Bible, being beautiful or handsome, it's trouble. It almost always means trouble. Think of Absalom. Think of David himself. When people are described as beautiful, Bathsheba, it usually is a sign that trouble's coming. And I think it's the biblical authors being very sensitive to this dynamic of how beautiful people can attract a scapegoating attention from a mob.
What a lot of religious people find fascinating about Girard's work is how these social theories of mimetic desire and scapegoating then collide with the world of the Bible. And it's notable that Girard started with the theories and then saw them in the Gospels. In fact, he got them from the literary masters of the West. You've mentioned Dostoevsky, Shakespeare, Melville, Proust, I think was another big one for him. But then he came to the Christian scriptures to study them for the first time in a serious way and said he was astonished and it changed his life. What did he see in the Gospels and how did it relate to his theories?
Here's what he saw, Brandon. It's a dimension now we haven't talked about yet, but it's a curious thing. Because the scapegoat provides at least an ersatz sense of peace. So we've sacrificed this victim. We've gotten rid of this person. And as a result, peace is broken out. Maybe there's something even sacred about that victim. There's something holy about that God or the gods are smiling upon our scapegoating move. Read Shirley Jackson's The Lottery if you want to see that. Is there something deep in the deep magic, as C.S. Lewis would say, of a society that says the gods are approving of this sacrifice. They need a sacrifice. And in Girardian terms, it's because we have found a kind of relief in the process. Okay, if that dynamic is true, what happens in the Gospel? The Gospels know all about these dynamics. It's not that they're naive or they're blind to them, because very often Girard says the great myths are kind of blind to this. They're unaware of these dynamics. The Bible shows it all the time. Think of the woman caught in adultery. It is a beautiful example of the Girardian dynamic, right? Peter being blamed in the courtyard of the high priest, etc. The Gerasene demoniac. I mean, they're all over the place, Girardian stories. But here's the difference. In the Gospels, God is not approving of scapegoating violence. Rather, God is himself the victim of scapegoating violence. How do you read Jesus? Jesus is, as Caiaphas, wouldn't it be better for one person to die rather than the whole nation be destroyed? That's Girardian logic in a nutshell. That's perfect. Look, everybody, look how divided we are. Wouldn't it be better for one, as tragic as that might be, for one to die rather than we all be destroyed? That's the old logic. What does the gospel do is it fractures that logic. Because God is not approving of scapegoating violence. God is identifying with the victim of scapegoating violence. And thereby, this is Girard, pulls back the veil on this whole demonic process and discloses the truth of it and shows the way out. So that's what he saw as apocalyptic about the Gospels in the literal sense, right, of unveiling. Something was unveiled that had been hidden since the foundation of the world. This scapegoating farrago was hidden. And he thinks in the great myths of the world, what you find is the hiding, the purposeful hiding of this dynamic. The gospel ripped back the veil on it, revealed the dynamics, and showed the way out.
It seems that in our digital age, the internet has only amplified this process of scapegoating.
Yeah.
Many online platforms, and I'm especially thinking of Twitter, which seems tailor-made for scapegoating, has allowed this to increase in our age. You know, terms like Twitter mobs or cancel culture have become everyday lingo, and we see it not just from one or the other political party or ecclesial party, but everywhere by everyone. What do you make of the internet's role in contemporary scapegoating?
Yeah, it's exacerbated it terribly. And it's funny, Brandon, I think of Girard, who dies in 2015. So the internet world was underway. I mean, he would have known probably very little about it. But the fact that he dies out in Stanford, so right in like Silicon Valley, as he lived in that, there's something that Girard was like a prophet who was sent right before this world sort of opened up, I think, to tell us these are the dynamics at work, everybody. And this internet world has it's like gasoline on the fire. It's taken the fire of this dynamic and thrown gasoline on it. You're exactly right. And the language that we use is very Girardian. Mobs can break out like that online. It might have taken time before the internet for a mob even to form. Now they can form in seconds and minutes, right? And then scapegoats? Are you kidding? All over the place. Someone who makes a comment or says something that's maybe slightly off of the politically correct can be just be abused massively by the mob. All that is very Girardian.
Well, let's wrap up with this, Bishop. For Catholics, what's the big takeaway from Girard's theory of scapegoating, and how should Catholics respond when we see it, when we detect it? How do we stop it or at least slow it down?
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing in the moral life. Once we see the dynamic, um, interrupt it. Interrupt it. See, mobs are formed because people are drawn into it. We're drawn into mimesis, and it's like a cloud forming, like a storm cloud forming. So one thing you do is actively step away from it when you feel you're being drawn into a scapegoating mob, whether in person or online, and then call it out. Call out those dynamics. Um, Reread the story of the woman caught in adultery. It is perfect illustration of all this, right? So the mob forms because people were looking for a scapegoat. They're looking for someone to blame. And then what Jesus does is he interrupts the process of mob formation. He turns their accusing glance toward themselves, and that causes the mob to dissipate. And then he offers a word of forgiving love to the scapegoated victim. Um, Imitate him. See, there's the positive mimesis, imitatio Christi, imitation of Christ. Imitate the one whose whole life was about breaking up these false kingdoms, right? Jesus says, I've come to announce the kingdom of God. Well, think of that now as God's way of organizing our lives together. What's God's kingdom? Together we look with Jesus to the will of his Father. You know, when the Lord says, I only do what I see the Father doing. My food is to do the will of my Father. Okay, let's now look with him up to the will of the Father. We'll be great. We'll be fine if we do that. When you start seeing those gazes lowered to worldly goods, red flag, because a mimetic crisis is going to break out almost automatically. So I think that's what Christians and Catholics can do. Keep your own gaze fixed at the transcendent, inexhaustible good, but then get in the way of these mimetic rivalries that give rise to mimetic frenzy, which then gives rise to scapegoating violence. Get in the way of it. See, once you understand it, then you can, you're like a good surgeon who understands the dynamics of anatomy and biology. Once you understand how this body politic is working, then you can do surgery when you have to, and you can bring health to the body.
Girard wrote nearly 30 books, and I know it's sometimes difficult for people to figure out where to start with him if they haven't read anything. So as we wrap up, let me recommend just 3 good books. The first one is an anthology of his essential writings collected by Cynthia Haven. Cynthia was not only his biographer, but a personal friend. It's called All Desire is a Desire for Being. It was published in the UK, but you can get it online.
I just
Bishop,
read
that
one.
one.
It's very good. Yeah, very good.
If you want to focus especially on Girard's, the religious implications of Girard's theories, pick up I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. It's one of his most important books, and also one that's usually recommended for beginners. And then finally, the book I recommended earlier by our friend Luke Burgess called Wanting, the Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. Yeah. So I'll include links to all 3 of those books here in our show notes. Well, it's time now for our question from one of our listeners. If you'd like to ask Bishop Barron something, you can send in your question at the website askbishopbarron.com. Greg from Nebraska has done just that, and he has a question for Bishop about a new educational trend, and he'd like Bishop's thoughts on it. Here's Greg's question.
Good morning, Bishop Barron. This is Greg Verpka calling from Nebraska. I'm in the Archdiocese of Omaha, and I've noticed a increase in the number of classic education schools, particularly the elementary schools. And I'd like your thoughts of these schools, maybe in comparison to the traditional Catholic education? God bless.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Brandon could answer it better than I could. He's a founder of a classical Catholic high school in the Chesterton Academy, family. I'm a big supporter of them. When I was out in California in Ventura, the Augustine Academy out there by my friend Mike Van Hecke, is a marvelous school, and I used to visit there. And these fourth graders are reciting Shakespeare to me, and sixth graders are reading Dante, and so really impressive the way they don't dumb the tradition down, and they assume the kids are capable of great things. When I first went there, with complete sincerity, I said to Mike, well, you're screening like the best and brightest here, right? I mean, you're only accepting the absolute top. And he said, no, not at all. We accept anyone that wants to come. But see, for so long, we've dumbed it down and lowered expectations for kids. So I'm massively supportive of that, especially at a time, as you well know, when Western culture is under assault, and the classics of our tradition are being called into question. Now, having said all that, of course, someone who's thoroughly educated wants to be in dialogue, not just with the classical tradition, but with contemporary trends of thought and what's going on in philosophy and politics and culture. So I don't want to defend any sort of ghettoizing of the process, but I think it's so important for our kids to be grounded in the great tradition, which then enables them to enter creatively and intelligently into the wider dialogue. So I suppose everything's got a dark side to it. There's always a sed contra, as Cardinal George used to say. The sed contra is, well, if I just get in this very narrow space of, Plato and Dante and Aristotle and Aquinas, but I don't know how to engage the contemporary culture, well, that's a problem. But I don't see that really as a real issue with these schools. I think they're providing just a very powerful foundation.
Well, as we wind to a close here, I'd like to introduce the newest book from Word on Fire. It's an extraordinary volume called Tolkien's Faith, A Spiritual Biography. It's by Holly Ordway, one of the fellows of our Word on Fire Institute. If you've enjoyed reading The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, and you'd like to know more about the ardently Catholic author behind them, this is the book for you. It's the first ever biography of J.R.R. Tolkien dedicated to exploring his deeply held Catholic faith. Holly shows in her expertly researched and richly illustrated study, which contains sources and photos that have never before been published, that Tolkien's faith and his fiction are intimately related, although in subtle and complex ways. So check it out. It can be found at wordonfire.org/Tolkien. Again, it's called Tolkien's Faith, A Spiritual Biography. Well, thanks so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time on the Word on Fire show.